buy-to-let investing is the staple diet for property investors in this country. Then why is it that so many people get this strategy wrong? In this video, I want to share with you the 10 biggest mistakes that I see property investors making when it comes to buy-to-let investing. If you're watching my videos for the first time, my name is Hussain, and on this channel I share with you my 15 years of property investing experience to ultimately help you get further, faster in your property investing journey. When it comes to buy-to-let investing, whether you've learned about buy-to-let from watching TV channels like Homes Under the Hammer and Property Ladder, whether you've learned about it on YouTube, from friends, family, it tends to be the most common strategy when it comes to investing in property. And many people do get this right, but often so many also get it wrong as well. So I'm going to share with you 10 biggest mistakes that I see that people make when it comes to this strategy. These mistakes are in no particular order. Mistake number one that I see being made is not having a clear outcome in terms of what it's you're trying to do with that particular property. So I might be speaking to somebody who just purchased a property from an auction. I'll say, hey, well done, great job, congratulations, you've just won that property bid. What is it that you're now going to do with this property? And they say, hey, we're going to rent it out. I say, okay, good job. What is the longer term objective? What is it you're trying to achieve with this? And they look at me as though I'm from Mars, thinking that's a weird question. And I'm thinking in my head, what is the outcome? What is it you're trying to do? Generally speaking, when it comes to buy-to-let investing, people are either investing for one, cash flow, or two, capital growth. Now, sometimes you get the two combined together and you get a double whammy and you get both. But generally speaking, people invest in property for one of those two reasons. They're getting some cash flow each month, some rental profit, or the property value is going to be going up over time. Now, as I said, sometimes you get the two together, but generally the initial objective is one or the other. Mistake number two is not having a clear methodology in how you're going to calculate your return on that particular deal. Now, people sometimes look at this as a gross profit that they're making from the property. Other times they might be looking at the yield, and some people look at the return on investment. I think it's important that you've got one solid methodology that you're using that allows you to compare that to many other investments as well. And for me, my favorite one is return on capital employed. That's a great way for me to be able to analyze how much money have we put into this deal and how much money are we getting back out. So ultimately, what's the return on the capital that's being tied up in this particular project? That's our money going in, as opposed to somebody else's. For example, if you've got a buy-to-let property, you'll have a mortgage there, you'll have some of your money that has gone in as a deposit, you'll have had spent money on solicitors, maybe valuation, stamp duty, etc., etc. There's a pot of cash that's gone in to that particular property, maybe getting it ready as well. Then you've got your rent coming in each month, but then off that rent, you will have management charges possibly. You might have other costs that you've got to pay, such as insurance. You'll have a mortgage that you're paying as well. So the net amount that you're actually getting, when you look at that over the year versus how much you put in, that's the way you calculate how much are you getting back based on how much you put in as a percentage. And I think that's the best method to look at when you're able to compare deals, so you're comparing like for like. Mistake number three is looking for deals that are unrealistic when it comes to those numbers. And in the end, you end up looking for a unicorn. And you don't find the unicorn because unicorns don't exist. Sorry to break that to you. So when it comes to looking for a deal, many people use a spreadsheet to analyze those numbers. They'll say, so it needs to be a purchase price of this much, there's going to be this much cost involved, and there's this much work that they're going to do on it, they're going to have this much rent, and they'll massage those numbers so it turns out to be the ideal numbers for them, the perfect deal. And yes, I understand that we want to get to that perfect deal, but sometimes we'll have squeezed things so much and have been unrealistic on those numbers that actually what we're looking for doesn't actually exist. And you'll spend many months looking at these deals, you analyze, reanalyze, overanalyze, but not get anywhere because you've been very unrealistic with those numbers from the offset. Mistake number four is assuming the cheapest properties are going to be the best deal. So sometimes people go looking for those really cheap properties, and often it's those northern towns. And I remember when I started, and in Birmingham, the market was quite active, it was quite hot at that time as well. This is rolling the clock back about 15 years. But at that time, I started looking at Stoke-on-Trent, which was the nearest, cheapest places I could find up north from Birmingham. Now, there's nothing wrong with Stoke-on-Trent, but there's some very cheap property there. And I soon found out why the property is very cheap, because sometimes we look at these deals and on paper, they are amazing. You buy a house for £50,000, you get £600 a month rent for it. Oh, it sounds amazing. But what we really need to do is, if that's a strategy we want to follow, is be really clear and understand what's involved in managing running those type of properties. There's a few challenges that you're going to face. Often with those type of properties in the really cheap areas, it tends to be only investors that are buying those properties. So there isn't really a market for general owner occupiers. So the only other are investors, which also keeps the price down as well, because it's a limited market in terms of who wants those properties. Then sometimes, not always, sometimes you get the tenants that cause a lot of problems, you'll have a lot of challenges. Yes, you'll get it tenanted really fast, but then you don't get any rent. You don't actually get any payment, and then you have challenges getting them out. By the time you get them out, the property's not in great shape. Now you've got to spend money putting that property right again and then going forward again. So, it's being realistic and understanding the challenges that you're going to have with very, very cheap properties. Another challenge that you'll face is that they're not always mortgageable. So mortgages often have a certain limit. So if you've got very cheap properties, you can't get a mortgage on them as well. So you're tying up all cash. If that's the way you want to go, that's fine. But it's being mindful and understanding that's what you're doing. Sometimes people make this mistake. Now, I remember speaking to an insurance broker once who had insured a property that some guy had purchased in, I think it was Newcastle upon Tyne, and he'd purchased some properties very, very cheap, or just on the outskirts of Newcastle, and he'd gone up there to do some work on them, and the insurance broker was telling me you need to insure the properties. He had some challenges trying to insure them, which was also a warning sign that it was not so easy to insure those properties. There must be a reason for that. And he'd refurbished them, put new boilers in, and then he'd been there for a few weeks, and then on his way back to Birmingham, he'd got a phone call saying before he'd even got back home, somebody's already broken in and nicked the boilers, and boilers have gone missing from the houses. So it just goes to show that, look, if you invest in cheap properties, it doesn't mean you're necessarily going to have these problems, but you just need to go in with your eyes open and be aware it's not going to be the same as regular buy-to-let investing. It's been unrealistic with the amount that's going to be required to get that property ready. So when you take on the property, it might be you just need to spruce it up a little bit. Other times you need to spend a little bit more money on that. Other times it might be you need to do a significant amount of work before the property is going to be ready to occupy. There's the compliance side to think of as well. So gas, electrical certificates, EPC, etc., smoke detectors, and make sure the property is safe and compliant, ready for your tenants. So there's a cost involved in doing these things. Now, the mistake sometimes people make is they're unrealistic in terms of how much they think these things are going to cost. They think they're going to be able to do it for this much, and it turns out it's going to be this much. They think it's going to take this long, and it turns out it's going to take this long to actually do it. And sometimes people talk about things cost more and take longer when it comes to property investing. And yes, you do hear that quite a lot, but sometimes it's also a lack of experience and not being able to get things done in the right way. So for example, if you're brand new and you're getting a couple of quotes, let's say you're getting the electrics upgraded because you need to get that new certificate in place, and you're getting various quotes in terms of how much it's going to cost. And this is where you need the experience of somebody else who's more experienced, who can give you some pointers and say, look, this sounds reasonable, that doesn't sound reasonable in terms of getting it done. So when you're doing the initial costings, also ensure that you've got a little bit of contingency put in place, and not only in terms of how much it's going to cost, but how long it's going to take, so that you don't go over budget and it doesn't take much more longer than you were expecting. Hey, I'm just pausing for a moment to really ask you a favor. If you're liking this content, then make sure you click on that like button and also subscribe to the channel. This way it really helps me out, because I'm on a big mission really to share as much knowledge as I can to ultimately help people get further faster in their property investing journey. And I'd really appreciate if you click on that like button, hit that subscribe, and let's now get back to the video. Mistake number 6 is having very little knowledge of property tax. Why is property tax important? Hey, look, the government loves us. The reason the government loves us because they can tax us in so many different ways in this business. Your job is to ensure that you are tax efficient. It's all well and good making money, but how much of it is actually going to end up in your pocket? Now, I'm not saying that you're manipulating the tax system, or you should manipulate the tax system. What I'm saying, you should pay what you should pay by understanding how the system works and making sure you're using things to your best advantage. So for example, when it comes to let's say capital allowances, are you utilizing your capital allowances? Inheritance tax, even though you're not going to be here when you're long gone, how's the tax going to be dealt with on your estate? Planning ahead for these things. And the most common one right now is section 24, where we can't offset interest against a cost, i.e. we're being taxed literally on the turnover of the business as opposed to the net profits of that business. Now, when you look at it from that point of view, if you're not familiar with these basics, it can work out to be very expensive when it comes to tax. This is why I believe it's really important that you sit down with a property tax accountant before you start your property investing journey, so they can give you some guidance in which is going to be the best structure for you based on what it is that you're trying to achieve in the long term. Mistake number 7 is abdicating your property management responsibilities to somebody else. Hey, look, I understand that you can't necessarily manage the property, you don't necessarily want to, and hence why letting agents exist, and that you can use them to help you manage your property and take care of your tenants. Now, there are some really good letting agents out there, and there are some, let's say, not so good ones out there as well. So your job is to manage the managing agent if you are going to use an agent to manage the properties. And what that means is you don't just pass it to them and say, oh, they take care of it, my agent looks after the property for me. That you understand what they're doing and you have some involvement in what's going on. So I own letting agencies as well, and the way we look at it is a case of really we want to run those properties and manage those properties as though they're our own properties, and that's the way we tend to treat it and we treat the business. And that way the landlord's really having them taken care of, and if they need any information, we've got everything to hand. And not everybody does that, and not everybody manages properties in that way. Some people see letting agencies a little bit of a cash cow, and they don't really necessarily put the work in that they need to look after and manage those properties properly. And remember, from a legal and compliance point of view, as a landlord, you're responsible. It's your property. You can't say, oh, the tenant hasn't got the gas certificate. There was no gas certificate done. I thought the agent was taking care of it. You can't abdicate your responsibilities in that way. You are still legally responsible. So it's knowing and understanding what's required when it comes to letting property, and then also making sure that you are overseeing the managing agent. Now, if you decide to do this yourself, or you self-manage your property, again, it's really important that you're aware of what's required. Now, I've got some other videos, we'll link them up on the channel. I'll link one up right here, right now for you, which is on setting up a letting agency and how that works, just so you understand the intricacies of what goes on when it comes to a letting agency. Mistake number 8 is vetting the tenants. Now, it might be, as we mentioned earlier on, using a managing agent, and they're going to be taking care of finding the tenant and vetting the tenant for you. But ultimately, it's your tenant and you are responsible for that tenant. So it's really important you know who's moving into that property. Now, I'm a bit of a fickler when it comes to these kind of things, and with our properties, I'd rather have a property sitting empty a little bit longer just so we get the right tenant in there. And we've been very fortunate from that point of view, in the sense we've had very, very few problems with tenants of properties, and that's, I think, because we're a little bit more fussy in terms of who we move in. Now, there are some agents that will just move anybody into the property. The first person turns up with some cash, the next thing you know, there's a drug den there, they've stripped the property out and they're growing weed there, and you're not getting paid either. Now, they'll destroy the property. I'm not saying this will happen every time, but really what I'm trying to do is highlight things that I see a lot of the time that gets missed. People are unaware and don't understand who the tenant is and what they're doing. So some of the basics, not only understanding what they do work-wise, have they got a guarantor, what type of job have they got, how stable is that job, what's the affordability on that job, is there any issue with credit in the past, any credit history issues. Now, credit referencing isn't the only method that you should be using when it comes to assessing tenants. It's important that you just have a good rounded picture of that particular tenant, because remember, at the end of the day, this is their home and your house. What does that mean? What's the difference between the two? The difference is you can't turn up to your own house and walk into it, because they are your tenants, it's their home. So they have some legal responsibilities that you have as a landlord, and giving them peace and enjoyment to be able to benefit from that particular property because they're paying you rent. You can't just turn up and do things that you want to in that property. And if, for example, you got an issue with a tenant that's not paying, or they're causing problems, antisocial behavior, they're causing problems with your neighbors, whatever it might be, and you're not happy, you want to move them on, you've got to go through the procedure of moving them on. And that can be quite time consuming, particularly right now with everything that's going on. It's taking months and months to be able to move a tenant on from a property where you no longer want them there. Now, sometimes, landlords get a bad rap saying, oh, they're evicting tenants and things. Well, if you think about that, why doesn't a landlord want to evict a tenant? Generally speaking, it's either because they ain't been paid their rent or they ain't been behaving themselves. They're the only two reasons, generally speaking, a landlord will ask a tenant to move on. So, it's when you understand who your tenant is and know a little bit more about them, and it means you're less likely to have problems, rather than just assuming somebody else is taking care of it, I don't get involved in that. Mistake number 9 is having the wrong mortgage product on your buy-to-let property. When it comes to buy-to-let mortgages, aren't they all the same? Does it mean once you've got a buy-to-let, you can put a tenant in it and rent it out? Well, not quite. It depends what type of tenancies that you have. So for example, if you want to use it, say, for supportive living or type of accommodation, then you might need a different mortgage product. Let's say you want to turn it into a HMO. It's very likely you'll need a different mortgage product. Let's say you want to use it as a holiday let. Again, it's very likely you'll need a different type of mortgage product. And sometimes, I'll see this mistake people make where they've just take on a property, it's a buy-to-let, and then they use it for a different purpose and they don't really think about the mortgage. Your mortgage comes with certain conditions, and at any point that the lender can revoke that mortgage and say, look, we're pulling it back, we want our money back because you're not doing what you said you're going to do, you're not sticking to the terms, i.e. it's a breach of the mortgage terms. So it's really important you have the right mortgage. And we'll link up a video over here where I go into buy-to-let mortgages in a lot more detail just to help you understand that. Mistake number 10 is really a lack of knowledge. Ultimately, a little knowledge is definitely a dangerous thing when it comes to property investing. We're talking about investing thousands of pounds, not really £2,000 or £3,000, tens, if not hundreds of thousands of pounds of investment. So it's really important that you don't make those mistakes. And ultimately, we don't know what we don't know. And that's really the purpose of knowledge and education. And you're already here learning this stuff, which it's really going to help you. But if you want to go deeper and you want some assistance, you want me to handhold you through the process, through the form of mentoring, then make sure you reach out and I can certainly help you with that. And ultimately what that is about avoiding mistakes and getting there faster. Reach out to me on any social media platform, ping me a message and we can arrange a one-to-one call to discuss how I can help you get further faster in your property investing journey. If you've enjoyed this video, remember I've got over 200 videos on the channel that you're probably also going to enjoy. But I've got one lined up over here for you, which I think you're really going to like. And remember, if you haven't already, then do click on my face down here to subscribe to the channel. And I look forward to seeing you on here on the next video.